Olhaj. Trebic, the city in the west of Moravia, in the southeast part of the region of Vysočina of the Czech Republic, is on the Jihlava River and is the second largest city of Vysočina after Jihlava. There are 36880 inhabitants. Origin of the city is connected with foundation of the Benedictine monastery in 1101. The lock is at his place now. The first written mention of the city is the diploma of the Abbot Martin, which is carried to 1277. Trebic acquired the rights of the city from the Margrave Karl in 1335, and thanks to that could become stronger by means of a fortification and a ditch. During the greatest rise, Trebic was the major Centromoravia after Olomouc and Brno. Possession of the local monastery were located almost to Opava. The number of inhabitants began to increase after World War II in common with construction of houses and also the panel residential districts serving generally housing for employees of power plant under construction in Dukovany. Today Trebic is the important center of the Western Moravia and the administrative center of the area. Trebic square of 57.6 square. The city since 1995 is divided into 17 parts, from which 10 are located within urban development and 7 in the next vicinities: Borovina, Budějovice, Podkadamky, Ikov, Nova Dvory, Nova Place, Pitsuzov, Podklasztorze, Patik, Racharovice, Rosipov, Slavica, Sokoly, Starečka, Tin, Končešní Město, Zamosk. In the city there are important monuments. The Jewish quarter, including an old synagogue and one of the Jewish cemeteries, oldest in Europe, and a basilica of the Saint Prokop in 2003 were announced by Monuments of UNESCO. Karlov Square in the downtown is one of the largest areas of the Czech Republic. The remarkable a tower 75 m high which belongs to St. Martin's Church, and also numerous Renaissance buildings. The Trebic wood mentioned in the Czech Chronicle was at the place of future city at the beginning of the 12th century. More senior settlement on this place didn't exist. The only archaeological finds which can be more senior than the monastery were found near Karlovy Square. Trebic's history begins in 1101 with laying of the Benedictine monastery by Princes Oldřich Brenský and Litold Znojemský, Conrad's sons. Foundation of the monastery was first of all the political act, and further the monastery served, mainly, the economical purposes. The place of laying was on Znojemsky's border and Moravian destinies. Through him there passed multiple trade ways. Powerful monastic fortress took under the aegis development of communication ways between Central and South Moravia, the southern and central Bohemia. Near the monastery, trade settlements which outgrew in the 13th century to the city of Trebic began to appear. Development of craft in this area was a prerequisite to their creation. The region of Podklasztorze, which is modern Trebic's part now, located on the left coast of Jihlava, was one of such settlements. He involved not only merchants and Jews, but also numerous handicraftsmen. His rapid growth was limited by the river and rocks that served further withering of this trade place, which was forced to move to the right coast. In Podklasztorze there were only Jews, where there was one of the most ancient Jewish settlements in Moravia. Trebic was put on the right coast of Jihlava. The place was unsuccessful as it was flooded, but numerous handicraftsmen of the city needed flowing water. The first written mention of the city of Trebic contains in the diploma of the Abbot Martin of 1277. Follows from it that most of residents of the time was the Czech nationality. Trebic was the property of the monastery, and that in turn was the property of the king. Under laws of the time it was impossible to build the city without the consent of the king, but no written documents on it remained. In 1312 and 1315 the city was visited by Johann Leuchsenbergsky and protected the city from Yimram's aggression from Boskowitz, the owner of the Sadaklap, at the time having the name Ungersberg. Having captured the lock and having executed 18 robbers. The important historical point, receiving the rights of the city from the Margrave Karl in 1335 thanks to what strengthenings by means of a fortification and a ditch became possible. Except the system of three-gate, Vienna in the south, Brensky in the east and Yuglavsky in the west, completion of stone walls was made, St. Martin's Tower became a part of city fortification. During Hussite wars from 1421 to 1426 the city and the monastery were occupied by Hussites. During war between the Hungarian king Mátyás Korwin and the Czech king Jerzy from Podebrad the city strongly was damaged. On May 12, 1468 Trebic was besieged by Hungarians led by Mátyás Korwin. Within 2 days the city was taken, plundered and burned. According to the Chronicle of Eliash Starchalki, the women and children were sent by Mátyás with military maintenance in Velkmezerzici where they found a shelter. The army of Sir Victorini, the son Jerzy defending the city from Podebrad, took refuge in the monastery, having destroyed the bridge through the river. Wagon trains with food at the same time remained ashore or fell down to the river. Stocks of food of the monastery ran low, and in the night of June 6 of Army Victorini from Podebrad, divided into 3 groups, tried to break through a siege to connect to army of Sir Jindrik from Podebrad, the brother Victorini. 2 of groups managed it, the 3rd group was given on June 15 to Hungarians. Actually the city was destroyed. Only in 7 years the empty city began the restoration. Trebic received Janek Knapowski from Sternberg for Mátyás's support in war for a crown and also as compensation for the lost lands in Bohemia. The new owner didn't hurry to restore the city and the monastery because of monastery debts and also hopes to return the lands in Bohemia. Residents became initiators of restoration. After Janek Mátyás's death I separated from his sons and I demanded to return the monastery to the abbot. It isn't clear what occurred further. From territorial boards it is known that Janek's son Yaroslav till 1481 was in Trebic, and further the monastery with the property passed from hand to hand various noblemen within several years. On December 15, 1490 William from Pernstein on condition that will pay all debts of the monastery became the owner. In 1491 William paid the sum improbable for those times in 15500 Hungarian gold, having designated in terms of transaction that if the king, the Margrave or Benedictines want to return the monastery, they are obliged to compensate this sum. William was engaged in economic development of the city and its vicinities, carried out necessary repair work in the monastery during which he was forced to demolish almost collapsed tower. After William's death the city and vicinities were inherited by his son January 4 from Pernstein, who sold possession of the city to January Yetrick, on condition that if he has no successors, then the city will return Pernstein to him, as happened in 1546. January Yetrick expelled Jews from the city. And upon return of the city in Vladimir 4 of January from Pernstein that continued this policy, eliminating with the Jews in the trade competition. After January 4's death from Pernstein in 1548 his son Vratislav, who sold Trebic and the accompanying possession, became his successor. 1556–1618. Yuri Nosovsky from Dubrovitsi bought the Trebic monastery with a mill, the city of Trebic with his suburb and numerous villages. In territorial boards the transaction is specified in 1558. Nosovsky remained owners till 1613. To buy Trebic, Yuri Nosovsky sold a considerable part of the possession. Yuri Nosovsky developed cultivation of fishes and brewing. After his death in 1568, Smil, his son, became his successor. Trebic was in a difficult financial situation, had numerous debts. Partially two of its helped to resolve Smilu's situation: successful marriage, in 1572 with Begonka from Žeratin and in 1589 from Katarzyna Waldstein. Smil kept numerous economical documentation. Followed from it that the number of houses grew in the city. In 1556 it contained 372 houses and about 2,800 inhabitants, to 1573, 376 houses with 2,700, 3,100. Income of the city increased. To the east from Trebic and Vladislav vineyards, but, on memoirs of contemporaries, were cultivated, wine was sour and tasteless. In the city there was a paper mill. Trebiceski paper was considered as very qualitative. Smil also tried to introduce fire safety system in the city. Were prepared in the allocated places of a ladder and a bucket for fire suppression. Safety of chimneys was checked. It was forbidden to have in houses excess straw and firewood. But all these security measures didn't save the city from one of the most heavy fires. In 1599 113 houses were destroyed. At the end of the 16th century and at the beginning of 17, the number of foreigners begins to grow in the city. Germans, Slovaks and Italians. František Caligardo, the Venetian merchant who possessed the Malavani house, was the best known Italian. In the period of Nosovsky government all evangelic churches had freedom. Development of reading a liturgy in Czech was kept. At Nosovsky the Trebic monastery was finally reconstructed in the patrimonial lot. All constructions of the former monastery served the economic purposes, including the Basilica of the Saint Prokop was turned into brewer. The city was reconstructed too. Many houses at Karlovy Square gained the Renaissance lines, the brightest of them, the Malavani house and the Black House, decorated. The Church of the Holy Trinity at the new cemetery was also reconstructed in style of the Renaissance. St. Martin's Tower continued to be the highest building in the city. After Nosovsky Trebiceski's death of possession, the wife Katarzyna Waldstein, who in 1614 confirmed the Augsburg Confession in the city, inherited it. On June 22, 1614 she married Karel Starszego from Žeratin, the Moravian territorial hetman. At the same time Katarzyna independently operated Trebiceski possession. In 1618 there was the Second Prague defenestration, with which the revolt of the Czech estates began. Karel Starší from Žeratin didn't support a revolt demanding legitimate government. On November 23, 1618 to Trebic there arrived Yoshi Erasmus Chernombil and Ladislav Velin from Žeratin as representatives from the rebellious party, but Karel refused to participate in a revolt, thereby having put himself at risks of loss of political and personal influence. In Moravia there were already insurgent moods, and Karel appeared in isolation. Eventually he was forced to move to the Rosický Loch. Defeat under the White Mountain at first didn't concern Trebic in any way, in spite of the fact that mostly his not Catholic population sympathized with the defeated king. Katarzyna's relative, Eliška Geretinsk from Waldstein, wrote her in a week after fight about cruel and perfidious actions of the One Army in the neighborhood of Prague. On December 9, 1620, Karel Starší from Geretin received from Ferdinand II the Charter of Immunity on the possession in Trebic. Thanks to this diploma in December 1620, Trebic managed to avoid the riots happening in Moravia, headed by Karl von Buekwa. The army left protection which made robberies in neighboring villages in Trebic, forbade petty bourgeoises to leave fortifications, destroyed not Catholic services. At the same time, in comparison with other cities, Trebic remained a tranquility oasis. 1622 and 1623 were one of the worst for Trebic. At the beginning of 1622 in Trebic, the regiment of the General Baltasar Moradas numbering 500 people moved, having created considerable financial load of the city. The regiment remained in Trebic till October 1622. In December 1623, Trebic was forced to accept 2 Silesian regiments for defense against Gabor Bethlen. Keeping a 3,000 army within 30 days cost the city more than in 9,000 gulden. 2 companies of the General Yanima wintered in Trebic since 1622 on 1623 and continued to remain there till June 1623. Maintenance costs of army laid down again on the city, which eventually was forced to request a loan to Katarzyna from Waldstein. On May 10, 1628, there was a new charter for Moravia which Gabsbergam proclaimed transfer of rights to a throne, equalized German with Czech, and Catholicism was announced by the only religion. In this regard, on September 27, 1629, Karel with the wife left Trebic. Spouses stopped in Vratislav and had permission of the emperor to return to Moravia, telling previously the intention to officials. In the spring of 1628, Katarzyna conceded the rights on Trebic to the brother Adam from Waldstein. In the contract it was designated that if Katarzyna is able to return on the permanent residence to Moravia, she returns the right for the possession to Szebeszem. Also, new owner is monthly obliged to pay her 600 Moravian gulden. Adam from Waldstein transferred this right to the son Rudolf, who extremely reluctantly fulfilled financial obligations to Katarzyna. After Karel's death on October 9, 1636 and his spouse's for 2 years later, their bodies were transported into Trebic where were buried without ceremony. Under Katarzyna's will dated on February 6, 1637, Trebic had to remain in Rudolf's possession, with the subsequent transfer by inheritance in the male line. In 1628-1629 many other inhabitants of Trebic, generally to Hungary and Poland, emigrated. Their exact number is unknown. At the end of war, Trebic was repeatedly forced to support various military groups, including the Swedish groups in Idlava. The municipal coat of arms represents a red board with the white horizontal field on which 3 black hoods of Benedictine monks are located. The lower and top parts, red, were decorated by silver arabesques earlier. 3 hoods symbolize 3 parts of Trebic: Trebic Abbey and Komarev Merchants-Probstvo. The city flag with similar symbolics is approved on July 15, 1993. Trebic's climate, moderately continental. Annually about 560 mm of rainfall. For the vegetative period about 350-400 m, fall on a winter season about 200-250 m. Dropout. Average annual temperature is 7.5 C in July of 18.5 C and 3.4 C in January. Trebic has the area of 56 km. Also it is divided into 10 cadastral areas and 17 parts, 10 of which make urban areas, and the others 7 are in close proximity. The greatest region of Slavici, the smallest Zamosk. The greatest number of inhabitants lives in the region of Novdvory, and the smallest in Rosapav. Borovina. 526 houses, 5864 inhabitants. One of enough new parts of Trebic. Her emergence is connected with the firm making footwear, belonging to Karl Budaszowski. For this purpose numerous houses for workers were built. For needs of this company quite big station on a spill of fuel oil for service of the boiler house was built in this part of the city. Further the firm passed to Tomasz-Podja. To Budykowica. 61 houses, 199 inhabitants. The village which is Trebic's part. The first written mention of the village is dated 1556 when 16 landowners and 1 tenant or the owner of the yard lived in the village. Porkodomki. 1158 houses, 7788 inhabitants. In this part houses are located generally, but there is also a couple of former enterprises and one operating. Here buses of the Tedem company are made. For 2001 7788 inhabitants lived in the area. Akov. 91 houses, 270 inhabitants. In old times the area was Trebic's suburb. There is a number of public institutions and industrial facilities. The considerable part of the modern industrial area is in the southern part. The winter stadium Harakoslavia and the football field Czech Trebic are also nearby located. In Akov Trebic's hospital and also several schools and average educational institution are located. To Novdvory. 987 houses, 16657 inhabitants. It is one of the largest and densely populated areas of Trebic. Generally here houses are located. Panel houses were built in the 70s because of Dukovana's NPP. To Novdvory existed already in the Middle Ages. To Nova Place. 161 houses, 1056 inhabitants. The area arose in the 15th century. His most part isn't built up, it is made by the forest and fields. To Nova Place arose, possibly, after restoration of the city at the end of the 15th century. A part of the city became in the middle of the 16th century. Petsuzav. 59 houses, 183 inhabitants. The village located in 1.5 km from city centre. Petsuzav belongs to the oldest economy of the Trebic monastery. The first written mention of him belongs to 1101. A part of the city of Trebic the village became in 1980. Podklasztorsha. 1009 houses, 3899 inhabitants. In this part of the city there are a Basilica of the Saint Procop, a monument of UNESCO, and also Vysokyna's museum. Podklasztorze, the old town. Originally I was the independent settlement. I became Trzebic's part at the beginning of the 20th century. Earlier in this part there was a distillery. The dog shelter and the stable are located here too. Patek. 66 houses, 212 inhabitants. In this part of the city there is only one private house, other buildings, farmer. Patek and his vicinities belong to the natural park of Trzebicko. There is also natural monument the Tchaikovsky Hillock. In vicinities several ponds are created. At Patek bones of prehistoric animals were found. Mammoth, reindeer, wild steppe horse and tur. Patek became Trzebic's part on January 1, 1980. To Racharovica. 49 houses, 155 inhabitants. The village located in 6 km to the north of Trzebic. Rosapav. 22 houses, 68 inhabitants. I belong to the Trzebic monastery since his basis. The settlement became Trzebic's part in 1960. To Slavica. 80 houses, 246 inhabitants. The first written mention of Ode to Slavica belongs to 1303 when witnesses Detlin and Konrad, brothers from Slavica, are mentioned in the diploma of Madame from Audits. In 1371 the village was attached by the Margrave January Yidrham to the Loch to Ruckstein. Falcon. 44 houses, 88 inhabitants. The village located in 4 km from the downtown, which is Trzebic's part. Once in this area tried to extract silver. There is a legend that inverses to the rock. 300 meters on the southeast from the center of the area. An exit from secret pass of the Trzebic monastery is located. In some opinions, the speech most likely goes about the old adet. Old man. 202 houses, 539 inhabitants. One of oldest towns. Most likely, it is mentioned in the list of monastic property in 1104 as Starica. About 1220 there was here a trade settlement which in fact moved from the region of Podklasztorze, which was limited to rocks and the Iglava river that interfered with his further development. His creation precedes creation of the city of Trzebic. The interesting dispute arose in the 17th century with Trzebic's noblemen in connection with the ban on brewing in the suburbs. Starecki's inhabitants so reasoned on this matter that Starek suburb, as tells the name, is more senior than the city of Trzebic, and had even own privileges, 4 houses on cooking and several houses of production of malt. Because of evil wartime that privilege was perfidiously captured by the mayor Formancom, who then lived in Starecka and transferred to Trzebic and back didn't return anymore. The floor space of Starecki was also a predecessor of the city of Trzebic, which arose later a little to the east. In the southern part of this ancient former market the bus station was in the 80s constructed. Uzes. 203 houses, 1171 inhabitants. Since 1960 is a part of the city of Trzebic. From the moment of the accession the region of Ting significantly grew and lost the initial shape characteristic of the village. Thing arose as the trade settlement on the old tradeway conducting to Przybyszyce. Today it is Dyslevin Street. This settlement from the moment of foundation of the Trebic monastery was his property. Mściszne Mesto. 53 houses, 210 inhabitants. The downtown. One of oldest towns, her center is Karlov Square, in a popular speech, the market. In this part Malavani and Black houses, a town hall, Kirill and Methody statue, are numerous petty bourgeois at home, including Pave. 124 houses, 416 inhabitants. The smallest part of Trebic also belongs to the oldest parts of Trebic. The Jewish quarter almost completely is in this part. The first mention of the area belongs to 1410. Before accession to Trebic in 1931, the area functioned as the independent settlement. For more details see the Jewish quarter in Trebic. In 1990s a mosque is announced by a monument. In 2001 several objects are announced by cultural monuments. In 2003 the Jewish quarter is included in the list of monuments of UNESCO. Sites. In Trebic there are many historical and cultural monuments. Among the main attractions, the Jewish quarter and a basilica of the Saint Prokop announced in 2003 by objects of cultural heritage of UNESCO. The Jewish quarter in Trebic, a monument of World Heritage of UNESCO, one of the most remained Jewish quarters in Europe. Trebic Jewish quarter, the only Jewish monument outside Israel announced by a monument of UNESCO. Quarter is valuable in general, especially original historical planning. The Jewish cemetery in Trebic, a national cultural monument of the Czech Republic. The cemetery was founded in the second half of the 15th century. Approximately till 1468 Jews buried directly under monastery walls. At the cemetery it is possible to find about 2600 gravestones, the oldest is dated 1631. In total at it about 11000 people were buried. In 1888 the cemetery suffered from a flood and later extended in the southern direction. A new part of the cemetery. In this part of the cemetery there is a monument to the victims of World War I. It is established in 1922, 20 victims. And World War II is established in 1957, 290 victims. Basilica of the Saint Prokop. The Catholic Church in Romance and Gothic style located in the Czech city of Trebic. It is constructed on the place of a chapel of Virgin Mary of the Benedictine monastery between 1240 and 1260. Is a part of an object. The monastery with a church of the Saint Prokop in Trebic. In 2002 it is recognized as a national cultural monument of the Czech Republic, and in 2003 the Basilica of the Saint Prokop in Trebic together with the Jewish quarter was entered in the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage List. Downtown. Through the river of the Jewish quarter there is Karlov Square, which is the downtown. The area by the size is 22000 square. Ammon was put as trade therefore in the people it often called the market. Karlev Square only at several square meters is less than Wenceslas Square in Prague, so in the past the city could equal by the sizes with the royal cities. At the beginning of the 19th century the area still had elements of the Renaissance and Baroque, but they were destroyed as a result of the fire in 1822. Now at Karlovy Square there take place the markets, fairs, cultural actions, national festivals and holidays. At Karlovy Square there is a town hall. On the southwest corner there is a Malovany house. The Renaissance building decorated in which the information center and gallery are located. Similar has the Black House. Other monument of the Renaissance. In 1885 the monument to Kirill and Methody was placed into the square. In the past on this place criminals, beheading or a pillory were punished. In People's House at Karlovy Square there is a constant exposition of František Mrtel, the artist and the sculptor who was born in Trebic. The tower has height of 75 m and ours with a diameter of 5.5 m was constructed in 1335 when Trebic received the status of the city. Originally I was a waterer in the security system of the city. In 1468 the dome of a tower was destroyed by the fire during invasion Hungarian troops. In 1577 and 1822 the tower repeatedly suffered from the fires, the roof was destroyed. The modern roof remained since 1862. The last repair of a tower happened in 2 stages in 1996. In 1716 the tower began to belong to St. Martin's Church. St. Martin's Church, a Roman Catholic church, was put in the 13th century by the Abbot Martin. The windmill of the Dutch type served in Trebic to needs of skinners. The building of a mill to several floors built of a stone and a brick initially was wooden. It was finished in 1836. The mill never ground flour. At one time it served as a warehouse. In 1977 it was reconstructed and closed. The building in functionalistic style built on the project of architects Boguslav Fuchs and Jacek Kompost in 1933 is in a northwest corner of Karlovy Square. Initially the building was 3-storied, the 4th floor was attached in the second half of the 20th century. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.